Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the Scepter. So this tank is the reward, well, it's not the reward, it might be the reward for that 450k damage quest, which we had in December. And the reasoning for this is that Wargaming in their article did state very specifically a tier 8 premium tank. So if we look at what premium tanks there are in tier 8, because now that many of them have converted to collectors, there's not all that many. The only one that is at all special or unique that would make a certificate like that worth grinding, other than fearless tanks, which they just won't give out, is the Scepter. It also fits the sort of style that that certificate was in, which is sort of fancy and gilded with gold, such as is the Scepter with its, well, luxurious appearance, let's say, even without its legendary camo. But what is the Scepter? Well, it is basically an M3 with worse stats. The only difference between these two tanks is that the M3 has better hull traverse speed, 39.2 degrees, versus the Scepter with its 34 degrees. The other difference is that the M3 doesn't have a reserve track. You can see that here at the top of the screen. There is no little tooltip for you to click on. However, the Scepter does have the reserve track, which allows it to move in reverse even when its tracks are taken off. So let's talk about the vehicle itself. Of course, there is a review on my website that has been updated if you do want to check that out. So the Scepter, in terms of armor, you can see very clearly its hull is quite weak, but its turret is quite strong. The thing with this turret is that it has weak points to lower penetration levels, as you can see next to the gun around the bottom areas of the turret. However, against high levels of penetration, it still has very good turret armor just due to its angling along the outside and on the roof. Also, its cupola is quite small. But you can see upper plate is only between 160mm up to 330 on these edges here. And 160 for a heavy tank is very bad. It means even when you angle it, you can't bounce even the lowest penetration tier 8 mediums. The lower plate is 120, which is decent enough, but it's not great at all. The turret front is between 225 and 270. So 225 is the areas under the gun. The areas under the gun are between 225 and 250, and then the areas sort of next to the gun on the turret cheeks are 270 plus, as you can see here, 275 to 500. The roof area, which is right above the gun, is between 400 and 700 millimeters, so nothing is going through this area above the gun. And then the cupola 120, which is quite weak. However, you can see against premium ammo, nothing much changes other than the areas under the gun and slightly the front areas of the turret cheek. Also, you can note, because of how this is angled, you cannot turn the turret at all, because then it becomes very weak, which I can show you with Blitz kit. So here, the gun facing forward, but then as soon as you turn it, the turret side becomes very weak, so you can't turn the turret at all. You have to face the gun forwards. And you can see that really the only weak areas are these on the turret cheeks. Even when you switch to premium ammo, the outer areas, which are well angled, still remain very red, which is pretty important against higher levels of penetration, just because some tanks in tier 9 have very good penetration, such as 340 heat, but because of how strong this is, even 340 heat isn't going through that. So overall, bad hull, but good turret. And you can see here, when you do use gun depression, it makes no difference to the hull armor. It is still very weak. And the turret, the bottom area of the turret does become weaker just due to how it is angled, which you can see here. Of course, when you go down like this, the bottom area does become weaker. You can see here it is 220 to 250. but on flat ground it becomes slightly stronger at, well, 270 to 280. One thing you can do with this turret, which I want to point out, is if you only expose the gun and nothing else, it hides the weak bottom area of the turret, and it only exposes the well-angled sides, side cheeks, and the well-angled roof, of course. So if you expose as little as possible of this turret, then the weak areas under the gun are not really a problem. But overall armor is strong turret, weak hull. So let's get into the gun. This tank mounts a 105mm autoloader, which is fairly similar to the well-known tanks in Tier 8, such as the Emil 1, the 1951, the Scepter SM, or the MX-5100. It's very similar to those guns, with 310 on AP, 260 on heat, and 350 on HESH. So this damage is fairly normal, except for the HESH, which is very low damage. It's more like the 100mm of the AMX-5100 and the Scepter SM, which have a very poor damage increase of only 40 from AP. And you might be wondering, oh, why is it HESH? This tank doesn't have HESH. It does have HESH. There you go. It's just quite low penetration and low damage. Both the Yo and the Scepter have HESH. But 3 shells in the magazine, very normal for a 105 at this tier, which is an autoloader, with 930 damage burst, which is 310 times 3. However, what's really special on this gun is 2.73 seconds intraclip. It is 10% faster intraclip, roughly, than other guns of this type, which generally have a 3-second intraclip. You might think, oh, that's nothing really, it's not that significant. But it does make quite a bit of difference in terms of how fast you can unload your damage, and it is something very nice to have. It also makes a difference to its DPM. Since this tank has the same reload as an Emil 1951, but it just has better DPM. 28.8 seconds of reload. Well, actually, that's not the same reload. It's better than an Emil 1951. But yeah, 20.8 seconds reload, which is pretty fast at this tier, giving it 2,123 DPM, which is very good for an autoloader. Any autoloader with really over 2,000 DPM and having such a big magazine potential is pretty good DPM. Penetration 225, that's good on AP. Heat is mediocre, 253, and a HESH is 50, which is quite low. It's more like a 100mm gun, not the 105 that this is. Aim time, pretty good, 3.7/3.9. Again, for a 105mm gun, this is good aim time, and that's due to having pretty decent base aim time of 2.3 seconds, combined with fairly average but not terrible gun handling of 0.21, 0.21, 0.12. On top of this, it's got very nice dispersion, 0.326, which is only worse than the AMX 5100. It is much better than every other autoloader 105mm other than the M3 Yo, and it's also better than most 105mm guns in Tier 8 in general. So overall, this is a great gun. The only downsides of this gun are heat penetration, which is a fairly mediocre 253, but that is easily fixed by using calibrated shells, or you can just try to aim for weak points. And then of course the low damage and penetration on its HESH shells, which are, well, you basically just don't use those shells because of how poor their damage is, especially not against tanks which might use a spall liner. But overall, very good gun. It's accurate, it's got good aim time, it's got good standard penetration, fast reload for the magazine compared to most autoloaders, and with good alpha damage as well. Just a very nice autoloader gun. So, mobility, top speed of 35, very normal for a heavy tank. 16 in reverse is slightly above average, but it's hardly noticeable. Traverse speed is 35 on hard terrain, and 26 on medium, which is decent, but it's not great. Actually, that should say 34, and I believe 25.4 on medium. That's just due to equipment changes, and I haven't remembered to change that yet. But its traverse speed is alright. On medium terrain, it's a bit slow, but overall, it's okay. Acceleration rate is 16.2, which is very good, actually. And it's got a strong engine, 1050 horsepower, for weighing a very hefty 64 tons, so you can actually ram enemies for quite a lot of damage in this tank. Its actual acceleration is 15 on hard terrain, again, still very good, and 10.8 on medium, which is decent. It's not bad at all. You do have to note, try stay on hard terrain just due to this terrain resistance difference, mainly for the sake of your traverse speed, just because that is the most noticeable difference. But getting into its consumables, just use the normal setup, as this tank doesn't have any special consumables nor provisions, so use normal setups for those. In terms of equipment, I'd say go with calibrated shells, just because this tank, with its already good accuracy, good aim time, good DPM, vents would help to specialize and improve those a bit, but I would say it is not needed, so you can use this equipment slot to balance out the mediocre heat penetration. And of course it also increases AP to a very, very nice 243mm of penetration, which means you don't need premium ammo in most situations. And if you did need it, then it has 286, which is just very high penetration for tier 8. Next, optics, of course, just because this is a heavy tank. Engine accelerator, again, this is a choice which you can decide based on what you feel. Improved control will help to improve that poor traverse speed on medium terrain, but it does make it slower at accelerating. For my personal preference, I like having the better acceleration, so I'm going with the engine accelerator. Improved assembly or enhanced armor, both are decent choices. Enhanced armor won't make a difference to the hull, it's mainly for improving the turret and making it harder to penetrate on the area under the gun and just making its weak spots smaller. Improved assembly, if you don't want to try and specialize in that turret armor, you can use this, as this tank's HP is fairly low at 1700 base. Next, gun lane drive, just because this tank has already pretty good shell velocity. I believe it's around 1000 or thereabouts. And improving its aim time just works very well with its already good accuracy and of course its pretty good base aim time. Vertical stabilizer, just because this tank has good accuracy, as I said. It doesn't need refined gun at all, and its gun handling is by far the most unimpressive out of its 3 accuracy related stats. But yeah, that is the Scepter's equipment. Let's get into its gameplay. So I have got 2 battles in the Scepter to show. The first one is on Castilla. In this battle I'm going to go to the regular place for a heavy tank, which is on the heavy flank close to the windmill. Unfortunately the Action X isn't willing to support me, but with the help of 3 tank destroyers, 2 of them being heavily armoured, I decide I'm still going to commit to this side. So here I'm going to do something you might not normally do for a tank with a 35km top speed and no hull armour, which is to cross out in the open. Luckily there's no tanks on the enemy team crossing towards the windmill, which allows me to cross without being spotted. So I'm going to use this tank's 8 degrees of gun repression, which I kind of forgot to mention. It has 8 degrees, which is pretty nice. Not quite as good as other tanks, but it's decent. So that IS-2SH used a heat shell, and he went through actually the side of my tank, unfortunately. The last shot does miss into the ground. I don't know what happened with that one. Jagdtiger telling me to retreat for no reason at all, because he just sits there. But you can see the IS-2SH pushing up with those fences breaking. And now, being reloaded, I'm going to go for the 274A. So, here I'm going to try wiggle the hull to get a bounce. You can see it makes my dispersion, well, get larger, but you can see I did actually manage to bounce. He shot the edge of my upper plate, which is quite well armoured. But again, you can see this tank, nice burst damage, pretty good intra-clip reload of 2.7, which allows me to quite quickly get in those shots. So now with the Carnarvon isolated in the river and 2 tank destroyers able to support me, I am going to, well, try and go for him. With 786 hit points left, he is now down to 1 clippable. Unfortunately, slightly low roll on the first shell, 218, but with 3 shells in the magazine, it is no issue, and I somehow managed to bounce another shot. Again, bounces in this tank are a bit surprising, considering its hull armor is weak, so you'll only really get bounces when your hull is hidden. Now with the ISU having shot, I'm going to push out around the corner and try and get some shots in. So the Scorpion there, I get 1 shot in, but he goes unspotted. I could blind shot him, but with the ISU now pushing around the corner, I decide to go for him. And unfortunately he does, of course, penetrate, but that is a tank with very high penetration. He actually goes in right under the gun mantlet, which is a pretty lucky shot. So now waiting for the reload on the Scorpion G, and I do manage to kill him before he kills me. So for this next part, nothing much happens. We're just trying to find where the Borsig is. So I'm going to go into the cap. You can see that this tank with its speed, it's fairly normal, fairly average speed, but it's nothing impressive at all. On hard terrain, its mobility is actually pretty good, just because it has great acceleration. So here I am sort of being wary that the Borsig could be flanking around the windmill and put a shot in through these gaps between the buildings, so I'm being a bit careful of that. Now the G-Saw joins me, so we're just waiting, and it's going to happen soon. There is the Borsig. So I pull back. He could pull out and shoot me and interrupt the cap, but he is not going to take the risk and just play it safe and lose the game sitting in that position. I do put a shot in, which spooks him, and then he doesn't reappear at all for the rest of the battle, and that is it. 3,700 damage for the Scepter, which is a pretty decent result. I did manage to block 2 shots, which is very lucky for this tank, especially as I was only sitting hull down for the first bit, and making 176,000 credits, which I forgot to mention. This tank, one of its main, very special traits is that it does make very nice credits. And of course that is going to be a big difference over the M3 Yo, which doesn't make credits because it's a tech tree tank. So, this next battle, again, it is on Middleburg in Supremacy. I'm going to go up the hill, just because that's the usual thing that happens on this map, and there are often heavy tanks who push the hill. The Yo is calling for help to go into the town, but he's got plenty of help, so me and this TNH are going to push up to base C. You can see the mobility of this tank going up the hill, just fairly average really, nothing special at all, but it's not bad at all either. So now, with the T-54 spotted and the Progetto, it does mean that there are some tanks pushing up the hill. I do get in 1 shot, which sets a fire, but he has an automatic fire extinguisher, which is a surprising sight. I immediately reload just because there's no point holding that last shell, especially when my reload isn't all that long. 20.8 seconds is pretty quick for, well, compared to some of the other tanks we have in tier 8, such as the Emil 1 or the the Armour SM. But the T-54 now down to a one-shot, so I go round and finish him off. And the Progetto trying to run away, but luckily good injury clip and good accuracy allow me to put in one extra shot into him. So now most of the enemies are down in the town. We're going to try and support the town. Unfortunately I'm not reloaded yet, or I could shoot the Progetto and the Borsig, but not quite. So here with the T-77 down to a one shot, I'm going to go for, well, the Charlemagne, then the T-77, and that Charlemagne's turret almost blocked my kill shot on the C-77, which would have been a bit unlucky. But luckily I do manage to clear those two tanks and then put in one shot into the Progetto, and now we are down to a 2 versus 3. I'm going to try and kill the Borsig just because he's a one shot, and luckily I managed to do it before he shoots me, and I don't quite have enough damage to be able to kill this 704, but you can see I rammed him. And this tank weighing 64 tons does do very good ram damage, allowing me to kill that Object 704 despite having more hit points than I had alpha damage. But now, unfortunately, I know I've basically lost this game, just because the Object 752 has 400-ish more DPM than me and much better armor, despite us being on fairly similar levels of hit points. Unfortunately he does push, so I can't sort of use the terrain, and then I managed to bounce a shot, which is pretty unfortunate, and then I low roll my AP on the last shell. So unfortunately, now down to 600 hit points against an Object 752 which can one clip me. It's not going great. But with 3 shells I do have a chance. He slightly low rolls, and then unfortunately I bounce another shot on that tank's troll side / frontal armor, and I'm just not going to survive this. However, still not a bad battle again for the Scepter. You can see how this tank's gun is very nice for unloading that damage and being pretty accurate. You can also see its mobility is pretty decent. Unfortunately not too much able to show its turret armor, which is one of the really nice traits on this tank, but you can see how the tank did work. Ace tanker in that battle, making 200,000 credits. Again, this tank makes very nice credits, but do remember that Top Gun and Ace do give some extra. But 67 ram damage, again, that allowed me to kill the Object 704, which is something you can utilize in this tank. But yeah, the Scepter. I've said in my review on my website, this tank isn't worth getting just because it is an M3 Yo with worse traverse speed and reserve track, which is arguably not very useful. But for what it is, for getting it in probably that 50k, 450k damage quest, it is a very good premium just because the M3 Yo itself is a very good tank, and this tank makes great credits. So definitely a very nice one to have, especially if you need credits, and it is a very unique vehicle just because it doesn't get sold in the store and it is quite rare. But yeah, that is the Scepter. Thanks for watching.